There's the rhetoric and there's the reality. And I would say the rhetoric and the reality are quite different. Now, the rhetoric that I heard from these far-right paramilitary settler organizations was that they were victims, both of they were victims of the Palestinians and of the Israeli government. They were misunderstood, they were oppressed, they were not treated fairly. That's the rhetoric. The reality that I saw was that they received an extreme amount of diplomatic and military or police support from the Israeli government. The Israeli government implements public policy through their so-called democratic process that overwhelmingly benefits the settlers. I mean, the settler policy is a policy that is done through the Israeli institutions of the government, and the settlers in the West Bank have a high degree of Israeli military support to maintain their settlements in the West Bank, to expand their territory. In contrast, the left-wing Israeli movement was not supported by the Israeli government. When they had protests, they were violently repressed by the Israeli occupation forces. The Israeli activists were arrested, thrown in jail, beaten up. When the settlers had protests, the police usually stood by and watched. I mean, I saw with my own eyes a situation where a large group of Israeli settlers were throwing rocks at a Palestinian house. They had drug a kid out into the street and were attacking him. And the Israeli police stood by and did nothing. Okay, and this is like a clear example of a violent situation that, the police should step in and do their job, as peacekeepers. If that's truly their job, they should do it. And they just stood by and did nothing. In contrast, a day later, in the same neighborhood, Israeli peace activists had a demonstration with hundreds of people, and the police just came in and baton swinging, as it were, and hauled off 30-some people to jail. So ISM worked with there's popular committees in the Palestinian villages, Bel Ain and Naileen and several others, East Jerusalem. And these popular committees are independent of any established political party, any established militant organization, and they choose nonviolence because they believe it's the most effective tactic for winning Palestinian liberation. They understand the risks that accompany with it. I was in Bel Ain and attended demonstrations against the wall on Fridays. These were, Palestinians of all ages would march to the wall. They would be met with tear gas, concussion grenades, flash bombs, rubber bullets, rubber-coated steel bullets, and sometimes live ammunition. And there's injuries every week. Throughout the years, several people have died from their injuries from being shot with, high-velocity tear gas canisters or live ammunition. People had been maimed and seriously injured. They understood the risks that they were taking. And of course, a lot of people had gone to jail, sometimes for months, without any charges. There was a night raid campaign while I was there. In Bel Ain and Naileen, the Israeli occupation forces would come in the middle of the night. They would kick down people's doors in the hall, organizers away, generally on false pretenses or trumped-up charges. So there's a great deal of repression, even against the nonviolent movement. Now, be that as it were, these people were committed to nonviolence. As a tactic and as a lifestyle. They thought that it was the most effective way to win liberation and to gain international support for what they were doing. I didn't hear anybody. We were told not to ever take sides in the conflict. Like if somebody asked us, "Do you support Hamas? Do you support Fatah? Do you support the PA?" Our response was, "We support the Palestinians," and that spoke to my feelings generally. But it was also a very smart way to, we support all Palestinians. We're not going to get into any kind of factionalism or a debate about armed struggle versus nonviolence. That's for the Palestinian people to decide. And I think there was a good deal of solidarity among the nonviolent and the armed struggle wings of people, because again, they're all fighting for the same thing. I'm sure there's plenty of disagreements. I'm sure there's plenty of different threads and currents and factions, but that's internal to Palestinian politics, and we saw our job as just generally supporting the Palestinian people, in principle, using nonviolence, and we left the rest to them. And in general, ISM was not Christian, was not Muslim. It was a lot of the people that came there were Jews from America or from Europe. I spent some time in jail actually with a Jew who had immigrated from Belarus, and he spoke to me about his religion in a way very similar to Catholic social justice, the Catholic worker movement, liberation theology, that he grew up with a Judaism that talked about standing up for the poor and the oppressed, that talked about having a strong prophetic voice, speaking truth to power, and nonviolent living. And so we had a very interesting dialogue. Granted, this is in the middle of a jail cell, right? We'd just been arrested in East Jerusalem for protesting the occupation. But we had a real, kind of Christian Jewish dialogue that I found very valuable, and I felt very fortunate to have that conversation with this person. Now, going, I guess to continue with your question, there are a number of other organizations, such as the Christian Peacemaker Teams. They have a presence both in Hebron and in the South Hills of Hebron. And of course, they have an explicitly Christian motivation for the work that they do. They call protective accompaniment reducing violence by getting in the way. And they see that as a very Jesus thing to do.
What's your commitment date?
Well, I cut my teeth organizing when the war in Iraq started, and through years of organizing around that, I think for some reason the conflict spoke to me morally. I don't know if it's because I'm fairly privileged white male from the belly of the beast from the United States of America, and I saw what was being done in my name, what was being done with my taxpayer dollars, and for whatever reason, I just felt personally called to resist that and to say that I can't allow this to happen in my name. And, it's the same in Palestine or in Colombia, in Yemen, in Afghanistan. Change the way that our country operates around the world, I think.
Is there anything else you can think of, David, that you'd like to say?
Just, I guess I'll leave it off with my favorite Martin Luther King quote. I don't know if I'll get it exact, but it's, we must all protest according to the method that best suits our convictions, but we must all protest. And that's what I'd encourage all of us to do is do what we know is right, do it in the manner that we feel we're most called to. There's no one perfect way of engaging in resistance. Find something that speaks to you personally and go out and do it. And we'll create a better world. Pretty soon we'll win.
Sweet.
Cool, thanks,
man. Very nicely done, David.